I was staying at a hotel with friends in northern Ontario. Can't exactly remember the town. Anyway, we were looking for some thrills at night, and someone busted out a Ouija board. We asked a few questions I can't remember, but I will never forget when we asked if it knew if any of us was going to die. It was a strange question to ask. It spells out a person's name that was with us at the time, and then a date, which was approximately a year later. My friend died a year later from cancer in his knee. He knew about it 6 months before he died. I was 17, and we were using the Ouija board in a room full of people, and one kid blurted out, "This is all fake. I need proof." Before he finished the word proof, the lights in the entire house went off. If that was a coincidence, it was the oddest one I've ever seen. No one else was in the house, and the fuse box was buried in the back of a closet. The kid's dad had to come home and turn it back on. Said it had never happened before. The entire circuit tripped. I always thought these things were bullshit. However, years ago this changed when I was playing with it with some random people at a get-together. We were talking to all sorts of spirits, and I wasn't taking any of it seriously. Then I thought of a way to put this to the test. I'm Kuwaiti American and was born in Kuwait, so I knew Arabic, and knew of a friend of my brother that had passed away recently. So I asked to speak to him. Only one person knew me at the get-together, and even then didn't know that much about me. And I was definitely the only one who could speak Arabic. I was in Oklahoma at the time. So I asked in Arabic how he died. The board spelled out car crash. I was a bit shocked, but still didn't buy any of it completely. So I asked a more detailed question. I asked in Arabic how old he was when he died. It pointed to 1 and then 3. And that's when I really started freaking out. No one would have ever known these details, let alone understood what I was asking. I asked for more details on the crash. He flew out of the sunroof. After that, I stopped, and haven't touched a Ouija board since. My grandmother has banned these from her house, because once when she was younger, she and her friends were playing with one. They asked who they were talking to, and the board spelled out Satan. At this point, her friend who owned the board started convulsing, and from then on she swore she felt a presence when she was sleeping. A few years ago, my friend brought her Ouija board to my house so we could play with it. The first few times it was used, I just watched while some of the other friends used it. Then I decided I would join. We asked if there was a spirit present. It said yes. We asked its name, but instead of just going to the letters to spell it out, it started going to random letters, not making out any specific word. I asked for its name again, and it spelled out bitch. I started freaking out, and then it spelled cunt. Then went right back to random letters again. I freaked out and left the room after that. Whatever it was either really mean or something other than a spirit. Never using one again after that. My brother built a Ouija board once and had some pretty weird encounters. At one point, he shaved down his planchette and found weird markings on it that only showed up under a blacklight. The markings were not made from my brother, and they would only show up under the blacklight as black. He hadn't made any marks on it while he was making it, and we believe the markings occurred from using it on the Ouija board. About 15 years ago, my sister had some friends over one night. They were in the basement watching some scary movie. They had a Ouija board. They started cussing at it and calling it shit and fucking fake. It stopped responding, so they began watching the movie again. All of a sudden, all the lights and electricity goes out. They start screaming. Then the TV comes on, all static, blaring noise. They were yelling and crying. Then the TV shuts off, comes back on to just a black screen. The words, "This is not a game anymore," rolled across the screen in all white. Afterward, TV shut off again, and they were in complete darkness. At this point, they ran out of the house. A girl brought her authentic Ouija board made out of maple straight from Salem. Ironically, she was a devout Catholic, but loved her board. It was a very interesting few nights in the dorm with it. I think the second night we were playing with it, it was going slow, not much movement. I had my hands off of the planchette because I was still unsure about it. Suddenly, it was like cold fingers grabbed my shoulders ever so slightly, and this terrible feeling in the back of my mind just came to the surface. I looked to the board, and the planchette started moving in figure eights. I looked at the girl and said, "I have a bad feeling about that," in time for her to realize what was happening. She stopped the planchette and bid the spirit goodbye. In that moment, the icy grip loosened and all was well. Everyone was freaked out by that, and the girl explained that the figure eight meant that something was trying to get out of the board. When I was 14, my best friend had a sleepover. Being the silly little girls we were, we decided to make a Ouija board to use, not really knowing any of the rules, like making it say goodbye. After an hour or so, I wandered off to read some tarot cards and watch the rest of The Exorcist. Here's where it got weird. After I left, the spirit talking to my friends changed. His name was Max, and he was looking for me. I've never known a Max in my life. My friends yelled out what he was saying as it moved, and I was writing it off as them teasing me, until he started giving them information about me that no one at that party knew, things about minor abuse I was facing, and other little things. That freaked me out, and I begged for them to stop playing, even after Max tried to convince me that he was not trying to hurt me. My friends were awesome and stopped playing before I started crying, and I thought that was the end of it. The next time we even encountered a Ouija board was the next year, and only one girl from the original party was among the group. We were baking a cake, so when the buzzer went off, she and I went to take it out of the oven. When we got back to the group, another girl turned to me and asked, "Who's Max?" Apparently, he stuck around after the first time. If my friends want to use a Ouija board, they don't invite me over unless they want to speak to Max. He's always around. A few times in my life, I've heard a voice call out my name. It usually makes me stop for a minute. And at least twice, had I not stopped, I would have been in the path of a car going too fast to stop before it would have hit me. I strongly believe Max has stuck around to be helpful. But had we not pulled out the Ouija board, I would have never known about him. My girlfriend told me this story about an experience she had with a Ouija board. She was in high school, sometime in 1986. She had a friend named Johnny who was suffering from a debilitating illness, who had recently been hospitalized as a result. Both she and her friend Shelley visited Johnny regularly in the hopes of keeping his spirits up and for a quick recovery. One night, after visiting Johnny, they were at Shelley's when they decided to try a Ouija board. After a while, they started communicating with a spirit who seemed to know a lot about them that it really shouldn't. After some questions about boys and general questions one would expect teenage girls to ask, my girlfriend decided to ask about Johnny and his condition. The board quickly spelled out 24 June 1987. Johnny won't have to worry anymore, and went to goodbye. My girlfriend and Shelley were so convinced that the board was giving them a date for recovery that they actually wrote the message down and sealed it in an envelope. The following year, on 24 June, it turned out that Johnny indeed no longer needed to worry about his condition. It was the day he died. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter, staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months, and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything. Our roommate, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best bet would be to open the door and show her that nothing was there. It sounds silly, but that's what we do with our daughter. I figured it would work, with the puppy too. I opened the door, and she raced to the front door. There she stood, snarling at the door. It was an angry, violent growl, one that I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her that everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped toward me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid, and started backing down. As her mannerism changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole. I can't explain why I looked, but I did. Outside were 2 kids. One was just a smidgen shorter than me and didn't look much younger. I'm 21, and she looked to be 16 or 17, slender and pale. Her hair a light shade of honey blonde. It was long, with blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She held the hand of a small girl who looked to be around 3 or 4. The smaller girl looked at the floor shyly, but had the same shade of hair tied back into a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under one free arm, and it was identical to one my daughter has, as was their style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children in and given them some tea or hot chocolate to get them out of the bitter cold. But something about them seemed off. At this point, I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't shushed the dog or grumbled. Nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. These kids had no indicators I was at the door. The older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downward so I couldn't see her eyes as she said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that was when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, otherworldly. And she spoke again. "Our mother is worried." As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I've never been one to believe in these things. As a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, I had written off many a ghost story from friends and family, eager to tell me their tales. I didn't believe it. Still, I couldn't rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently, I backed away from the door. Lucy, still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in to use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step, the tone changed. At first, she seemed polite. When I took that second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have just broken in. I'll ask again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door, and I inched backward, though something inside me seemed to slowly be pulling me back toward the door. It wasn't a physical pulling so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I got to my room, covered up the window, locked the door, and sat there in the dim of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door once more, and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about them that black-eyed kids can't just come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I'll still fear I'll be the exception. When I told my husband, he said it was just a dream. He keeps telling me to forget about it. But this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when the house is silent at night, the fear of a knock at the door, tells me otherwise. I live in northern Texas. I don't believe in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, aliens, whatever. However, I did have an event happen to me on Halloween 2013 that has me questioning everything. It had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighborhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself, We usually have kids from different areas dropped off in ours, and have a constant parade at our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 or 10 groups of kids come by the entire night. It was about 9:30, and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of those ghost shows, based on supposedly actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it was Halloween. At this point, we hadn't had any activity in the door in over half an hour, and it was getting late, so we decided to turn off the porch light and let our dog out of her crate. Our dog Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in there because we were afraid she'd get out to play with all the kids, and I didn't want to chase her down the street. Also, we didn't want her to scare any of the kids because she was a little intimidating to smaller children. I turned off the outside light, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch and laid down at my feet. It was getting close to 10 p.m. when my husband decided he'd had enough and was going to shower and get ready for bed. Now alone, watching TV and kind of on edge. It wasn't long after I heard the upstairs water turn on for the shower when I also heard a light knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, "What the hell? Really? It's almost 10, go home." But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows in the dark, and without the porch light on, it would be extra obvious to anyone out there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door has a big beveled glass panel, and anybody right at the door could see in enough to see someone was in the family room watching TV. Again, from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, and she was gone. I followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be right there. She wasn't. I stood up to look around and found her crouching by the back door, like she wanted out. But she never asks to go out like that. She always comes and licks my hand or puts her head on my knee. This was completely out of character for her, and I have to say heightened my anxiety. I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me now. About that time, a car drove down our street and cast just enough light on the door to where I could see the silhouettes of 2 small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids. Probably a couple of my neighbors on their way back home that wanted to stop by and show me their costume or something. I headed to the door and turned on the porch light. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and I began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run the streets that late at night. I only opened the door enough to where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately as odd was the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were in normal street clothes. Also, they didn't say trick or treat either. I began to feel very uneasy. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older. I'd say about 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features, as the lights are from high above at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any light from inside to hit them directly. The boy was younger and about a foot shorter, I'd say about 8 or 9, and looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely asked, "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mom?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, didn't have a cell phone? And I couldn't remember the last time I had anybody ask me to use my home phone. Hon, don't you have a phone of your own to call your mom? I asked her. This was when things got really weird. Both kids turned to look at one another, like they were going to say something, but never spoke. They both turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here and my brother is scared." I have to admit, there were two competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart. I wanted to help these small children get to their mother. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then that I noticed that during the short conversation I'd already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they again looked at each other. After a moment, they turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside while you call our mom?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer toward the door like she was going to just walk in on past me. As she did, she stepped into the light, coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror that I don't think I've ever felt in my life. I could feel every hair on my arms and the back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where my face was just able to stick out. The girl stopped and pleaded again. "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took over and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mom if you give me the number," I shouted through the door. "But I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them stand there on the porch, just staring at me through the beveled glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. It would have freaked me out even more not to know where they were. After what seemed like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, I decided I'd call my neighbor that lived across the street. As I made my way to the side table to my phone, I glanced back at the door and noticed when I got to my phone and started to look for my neighbor's contact info that only then the kids stepped away from the door and began to walk to the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look to see where they went, still not calling my neighbor. From the front door, I could see that the kids were standing under the street lamp nearest my house, staring right at me. As I lifted the phone to my ear, only then did the kids start walking down the street. I met my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. I don't believe in any of this stuff. I had never even heard about black-eyed children before talking to my friend. What I really think, what I need to think, is that these were just some kids out yanking people's chains on Halloween. But I will say they were really good. They scared the shit out of me and my dog. Yesterday, I noticed that my neighbor hadn't put out all his Halloween decorations yet. The past 2 years I've lived next to him, he's gone all out for Halloween. I don't know him well, he's younger, single. So anyway, I got home from work and was walking up my driveway. I saw him outside and said something like, "Hey man, you better get your Halloween stuff up or that house down the street's gonna beat you for best decorations." He kind of smiles sheepishly and says that he's actually going to keep his house dark this year and just put some candy out. I asked if he was going out of town, but he said no. Something happened last year that really scared him. Now I was concerned for my own safety, if some weirdos were coming around our neighborhood. So I asked him what happened. He said last year he had his brother's family over so they could trick-or-treat in the neighborhood. He had a bunch of kids come to the door like always. His family took off around 10:30, and there were only a few trick-or-treaters, but by 11:30 they were pretty much done. So he was inside watching TV. The doorbell rings. He grabs the candy bowl and heads over, noticing that it's a little past midnight, and that's pretty rude for trick-or-treaters to still be out. But then he notices he hasn't turned off all his decoration lights yet, so his house is a beacon. He swings the door open and is about to yell boo to freak them out, but stops dead when he sees the kids at the door. He said one was probably around 13 or 14, and the other one around 16 or 17, both boys. They weren't dressed up, but he remembers the older one was wearing a flannel shirt. He was immediately overcome with uneasiness, like opening the door was a huge mistake. They just stared at him, and he noticed that they had really big irises and dilated pupils. He couldn't even see the whites of their eyes, so he figured they were contact lenses. He was frozen there, holding the candy bowl, like he couldn't slam the door in their face as much as he wanted to. So he nervously tried to smile at them, hoping they would break character and ask for candy or something. The younger one said they had gotten lost and needed to come in and use his phone. That was when he closed the door more than halfway on them and said, "No, sorry." And the older one said something like, "Can we just wait in your house till our parents come get us?" But by then, he was convinced that his life was in danger, and these kids were high or something, intending to rob him. And he just kept mumbling, "No, sorry, good night," as he inched the door closed and locked it. He told me he was so fucking scared at that point that they were going to break in or something. But when he looked through the peephole, they had turned to leave. He watched TV with the volume really low so he could hear any sounds at all. And he said he stayed up until 5 a.m. because he was too scared to go to bed and drop his guard. The whole time he's telling me this, I'm thinking, oh my god, this sounds so familiar, just like the Black-Eyed Kids urban legend. Then I thought, hey, maybe this dude is trying to scare me. After all, he does have the Halloween spirit. So I'm looking at him, trying not to seem too gullible. So I'm like, man, that's crazy. That sounds just like the Black-Eyed Kids. He looks at me blankly. The what? Is that a movie or something? I said no, but I told him to go look it up online. An hour later, I get a knock at my door, and adamantly almost jumped out of my skin thinking it was a demon child. It was my neighbor, and his eyes were enormous. He swears to me up and down that he had never heard of the Black-Eyed Kids before, and it's so similar to what happened to him. So we talked a while longer, and I told him that quite possibly a few kids with black contacts were trying to freak people out on Halloween, which would be genius, by the way. But he said the fear he felt was so primal the second he opened the door. I was in the 7th grade, and we just moved into a Milltown house. One of those houses built close to a dam and textile mill that used to house the families of mill workers. The upstairs area always gave me an eerie feeling, but I shrugged it off as the discomfort of living in a new place. From the very beginning, I had trouble sleeping and was jolted awake in the middle of the night repeatedly for no apparent reason. I started hearing thumping. It started as occasional soft thumps, seemingly coming from the attic. I had my dad check it out to ease my mind, but he found no explanation. Fast forward a few weeks. The occasional knocking was becoming louder and I continued to wake up in the middle of the night. One night I was jolted awake again, but this time I heard a loud bang, accompanied by the sound of breaking plastic. I looked to my window across the room, and the blinds had been completely torn and were in disarray. My door was closed, the windows were closed, and the house was locked up tight. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. I made it downstairs pretty quickly and the sound woke my parents, so they went upstairs to check it out. They found no cause or explanation. I slept on the couch downstairs until we moved shortly afterwards. My parents still live in a neighborhood not far from the house, and I've noticed that it never keeps an occupant for too long. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you shouldn't be scared of a ghost. Fear the living instead, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and would be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things that were going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed for my dad's car that he had willed to me. Now this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had the keys to the cabin and the code for the alarms. The first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the unusual happened. Spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking on the balcony. We had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content, and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself had 2 stories. Bottom story had the living room, side guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. The upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms, and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors always creep me out. The 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, playing games and watching DVDs. That day it was a pretty heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started to get weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days I knew that no one was currently staying there. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I might not have noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. The prints led away from my cabin and then disappeared in the snow toward the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he needed to go outside. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to go outside to the driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier. But he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up toward the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but all right. Maybe there were animals outside and he wanted to chase them down. Not wanting to chance anything, I pulled him back inside and we both went back upstairs. After a half an hour, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man's length stride. So it was really freaking me out. My dog heard the noise too, and ran to the balcony, expecting for me to let him out. I'm a tough guy, and at the time considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out onto the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top, undisturbed. Was it all in my head? It couldn't be, because the dog heard it too. Maybe he was feeding off of my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax a little. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. And that's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouching in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It was squatted on one branch and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. Fuck me, what the fuck is that? I wasn't even sure if I was really seeing this thing, and just stood there, staring, motionless. I noticed my dog stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining my light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled my dog in with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. Later on in the night, I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent. It did not stop for nearly an hour. My dog seemed to just stare at the door, but he wouldn't even go near it. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door. But at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. Eventually, I passed out and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful, and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. It could have all been in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time, but my gut tells me it wasn't all in my head. I grew up in the Arctic. In the town I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, it was an extremely normal occurrence to see all sorts of strange lights move across the sky. Keep in mind the winter is long in the Arctic, which means longer amounts of time being spent under the stars. It's quite beautiful, as long as you don't mind the cold so much. Sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, shut it down, and just lay down on the snow looking up at the majesty of it all. The only thing disturbing about the silence being the occasional breeze. The northern lights are also a common occurrence. Doesn't happen every day, but often enough that they start getting ignored after a while. As long as they aren't too spectacular, anyway. On one particular night, without asking my parents, I decided to go on one of my midnight drives out of town. I drove a few kilometers over the hills to find a spot devoid of light, shut off the machine, and settled into a good spot to look up and be retrospective. It wasn't all that interesting a scene. A few satellites passing here and there, some relatively boring activity affecting the magnetic field, etc. And then I started noticing a clicking noise. At first, I thought it was the sound of the snow machine cooling down, as engines expand and contract a lot in the cold. But the source of the sound definitely wasn't coming from that direction. My next thought was there must be an animal nearby, in which case I need to get the fuck out of there. But the clicking was far too regular for an animal to produce it. It was fairly mechanical sounding, and again the source of the sound wasn't coming from anywhere around me. It was coming from above me. So I naturally looked up to determine the origin of the strange noise. I see what I always see. Stars, northern lights, a lazy satellite crossing the sky. All normal stuff. But before I dismiss it altogether and begin heading home, I noticed something strange in the aurora borealis. There were 3 rather strong points of light. I ignored them at first, thinking they were oddly symmetrical stars. But this proved false. They were definitely getting brighter. I kept staring in morbid fascination as they grew stronger and stronger, yet still only remaining single points in the sky. All the while, the clicking noise was getting louder and louder, more pronounced. Almost like someone started with tapping a pen on a desk to clacking billiard balls together inside of my head. Then it stopped. The lights were gone. The clicking was gone. And aside from being a little stiff, cold, and rather petrified, I was fine. I jumped back on the snowmobile thinking maybe I'm going crazy. The machine takes a little longer than usual to start up, and I'm beginning to worry. But soon it runs, and I'm heading back to town. As I'm driving back, several plausible scenarios as to what occurred are running through my head. I was thinking it could have been a helicopter from the mine or some strange northern lights. Probably not that big of a deal. I pull up to my house. Lights all out. Strange, it wasn't even that late when I left. Open the outer door as quietly as possible. Remove winter gear. Enter inner door. House is quiet. Really quiet. My parents are teachers and are usually up late marking or watching TV. And all I'm thinking is I have to get to bed without anyone noticing. Proves to be easy as I'm soon under my covers. I go to set my alarm for the next day. All of a sudden, everything makes sense. Engine hard to start, stiff, rather cold. Nobody up when I was gone. What felt like relatively a short period of time. It was almost 11 p.m. when I left. And it was now creeping up on 6 a.m. I stood staring at clicking lights for almost 7 hours. I never ended up sleeping that night, and I don't go on late-night snow machine rides anymore. I was in my first year at university, completely new to the city and its surroundings. One evening, my friend and I decided to take a trip to the mall. It was around 8 p.m., and we got on a bus that my friend claimed would take us to the mall. We ended up at an empty bus terminal at around 10 p.m. We waited and waited for another bus back, but there was no one there but us. A while later, an old man walked by and told us that since it was so late, another bus wouldn't be coming for an hour or so. He told us to turn and walk down the road, and we'd find a bus stop where a bus would soon come. We followed his instructions and entered this single-lane road with tall trees on each side. There were only a few street lamps working, so the area was dimly lit. The road was built on a slant. Our bus stop was in the middle, and we could see all the way up and down the road. All we could see was the road and trees on either side for at least a half a kilometer. We waited and waited. My phone battery died, and my friend had forgotten hers in her dorm room. We were starting to think there wouldn't be any bus coming and started to panic. Then, as we were waiting, I turned around to see two kids with backpacks walking down the road. I was relieved to see them, as was my friend. When they were close by, I asked them if they knew about any buses. These kids were around 12 or 13 years old, one boy, one girl. We then proceeded to have the following conversation with them. "Hey, do you know if there are any buses coming?" The boy says, "Let me check." Takes out his phone, walks toward the bus stop sign, but it's empty. Doesn't say a time or the stop number, just the picture of a bus. I knew this from before. So I say, "The timings aren't there, and there's no number to text either. I've looked at it before." The boy, still looking at his phone, "Oh, it's okay. Your bus will be here in 10 minutes, I think." Meanwhile, during this conversation, my friend started talking to the girl. The girl says, "Where are you guys from?" My friend says, "We just started university here. What about you?" The girl says, "Oh, we're in school and we're just heading back home." My friend, not thinking too much about it, says, "Oh, okay." After the boy told me that the bus would be there in 10 minutes, I turned to my friend to tell her this, turned back to the boy to thank him, and he was gone. Just gone. The girl and the boy were nowhere to be seen. I literally had looked away for about a second. We both looked up and down the road, by the trees, by the fence around the trees. The kids were just gone. Needless to say, both of us were scared as hell until our bus arrived. It was the last bus, and it was around 12:17 a.m. when the bus came. I know this because I asked the driver what time it was. I asked my brother about the area later. I didn't tell him what had happened, and he said that there's a graveyard there. And then it hit me. What the hell would two 13-year-olds be doing out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night? I didn't believe in paranormal activities, but I can't seem to find an explanation for this one. I was at a friend's dinner party once when he revealed that one of the guests was a respected psychic. I am a huge skeptic and I swear every word I'm about to type is true, and there were many witnesses. The psychic agreed to do a reading for us. We were all in the living room, maybe 20 people or so. She began with the expected stuff we think of when we think of a psychic doing a cold reading. I had had a few drinks and was feeling pretty loose, so I was just observing and waiting for her to do anything interesting that an observant person or someone trained in cold reading couldn't do. About 20 minutes into it, she stopped and said, "Okay, there is a stronger power than mine here, and it needs to be acknowledged." I perked up, thinking things were about to get interesting. She said anyone who had anything to say should speak up. She asked us to look around the room and allow ourselves to see one another clearly and look into each other's eyes. And if we felt impressed to tell someone something, we should. I will admit that I felt a little drawn toward a woman I have never met. Her name was Tammy. I didn't say anything. The room was silent, and the silence got awkward. Like when a teacher waits overly long for a student to respond to a question he or she clearly doesn't know. So she probed again. Someone here has a strong gift and needs to tap into it. There are messages waiting to be heard. If you feel drawn to someone, say so. There was another silence. Then, she looked right at me and said, "Oh my God, it's you. You are a gifted empath. You must speak." I blushed and kind of laughed it off, but several of the guests insisted that I must speak my mind. So, I said I was feeling drawn toward Tammy. The psychic asked me to let my guard down. "Reach out with your mind," she said. So I tried to let my mind go blank. Suddenly, I could hear the song Journey, "Don't Stop Believing" in my head. Not my usual stuff. Then I started to feel sad. I'm normally a pretty happy guy, and this odd wave of sadness just came over me. At the same time, the name Mark came into my mind, followed by an urge to tell Tammy, "Thank you." I didn't know what to do. The psychic told me to just start talking. Describe what I was experiencing. So I did. I closed my eyes and started to talk. As I got to the thank you part, I started to choke up and cry a little. I was actually feeling extreme gratitude. I opened my eyes and Tammy was white as a ghost. Her friend Mark had died in the early 90s from complications with AIDS. She had been the only friend in his group of friends to visit him, and she did so regularly. The song had been their pep song, and she said Mark had died unexpectedly after seeming to have rallied a bit. Tammy was trembling. I was shaken. The psychic was smiling, and the guests were all staring at me. A bevy of questions followed, almost none of which I could answer. I've always relied on my gut, but had never had that specific of an experience before. I do not believe in an afterlife, and as I said earlier, I've always been a huge skeptic. I could not explain what had just happened. Others asked me to read for them. I didn't know what to do, and was frankly a bit weirded out. The psychic told me to hold people's hands and look deep into their eyes. That night, I told a man I never met that Sharon, the woman that allowed her friends to pay her for the right to molest him as a boy, was sorry and in torment. This huge, burly man crumpled into a pile and said he had never told anyone about that ever in his life, and that I had even nailed her physical description. I told a young woman I'd never met that the relationship she was in was not working because she was too focused on wanting a child, and that the stress was causing her to not become pregnant and making her act out in anger toward her husband. She left in anger because people had been talking about her behind her back and told me her secrets. I can tell you that that was not the case. All total, there were about 5 instances out of 6 attempts that night that were dead on. The one that did not work was my partner. Nothing I said was right. I was left very, very perplexed by the whole night. Being a student and researcher, I decided to explore it. I worked that summer with the psychic, who I had befriended, on exploring things I do not understand. She determined that I am, indeed, an empath, and that I can feel, read, and interpret emotions from people that allow my intuition to put together stories. She also believes that the world is full of emotional impressions and scars, and that empaths can feel their echoes. Since then, I have determined that I am indeed able to do something unusual. I don't do it as a hobby. I don't make money off of it. And to be honest, I do it as a I've had one too many drinks party trick, because that's about how seriously I take it. However, I do it one-on-one, because I've discovered one too many uncomfortable personal things people don't want everyone in earshot to know. Here's what works best for me to read someone. The expectation is that I will tell them something they need to hear, and that they do not tell me anything about themselves or what they hope to hear. It works best when the person is an absolute stranger. I ask for an item that they usually have on their person, a ring, someone's glasses, etc. It has to be something that they've touched often. I've found the absolute best results come from pillows people sleep on. I spend 5 to 10 minutes holding the object in silence, allowing my mind to wander, and then I will ask for the person's hand. Then I just talk. I let my mind wander. About 90% of the time when I open my eyes, they are staring at me in disbelief, crying, or smiling. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I do like doing it, but it challenges my beliefs to the core. One of my teachers used to work at a boarding school, and one night, during a school movie night, a student left to use the restroom, and after a bit of time had gone by, my teacher went to check on her to make sure she was okay. She wasn't. She was huddled in the corner of a shower, foaming at the mouth, with bloodshot eyes. My teacher freaked out and called a couple of others over, and the chick started spewing out random incoherent things in a really deep voice. Eventually, she snapped out of it and didn't remember a thing. They went to her dorm room after and said she had written on her bunk bed, "I love Satan." By they going back to the dorm, I met my teacher and 2 other supervisors. After this incident, the girl left the school. I'm 6'2", a rather fit man. I practice Aikido and can bench 240 pounds. My father and his brothers are large as well. One of my aunts is probably about 5'4", 110 pounds. And there was a time when she went plain crazy. She would get incredibly angry out of control at random times, spitting nonsense words. And there would be absolutely no way I, or my father, or both of us, would be able to get her down. She had 10 times my strength. We needed 4 to actually pin her down and get her to stop moving until she calmed down. This was extremely scary. She could just pop off at any time and go crazy. Now, I didn't believe in the supernatural, but my grandmother, a rather traditional Moroccan woman, was convinced she was possessed. And honestly, it really felt like it. For those who don't know it, Morocco has a pretty big culture about supernaturalism, sorcery, possession, and exorcism. So most of the elders in the family firmly believe it. Fast forward a few months later, and it was getting way too difficult for us to handle her. My uncle contacted a good friend in Morocco who has an exorcist in his family. The exorcist asked us to do one rather twisted thing. He asked if my aunt would put a drop of her blood in a glass of water and leave the glass somewhere in the apartment while she's sleeping. We were reluctant, but my grandmother forced her to do it. In the morning, the glass was empty. I'm still convinced she probably just woke up at night and drank it. But the exorcist version was, she was possessed, and giving him the blood was just a way for you to welcome him and calm him down temporarily. She needs to see an exorcist as soon as possible. We were convinced he was right. Seeing her often getting crazier and crazier, sometimes you just choose to believe a possible solution. So at this point, I decided to believe, and we had to get proof that he was right. We live in France and decided to go to Morocco. This was a 1,500-kilometer drive, plus a 6-hour boat ride, and then another 500-kilometer drive into Morocco. During the drive, I've never been as scared as this day. I was sitting down behind, on the right, my father on the left, my aunt between us. She went crazy at one point. We couldn't really hold her as she was trying to hit my uncle who was driving. We almost ran into a wall. My father had to choke her until she lost some strength. Finally, we're in Morocco, and we come to this village named Safro, known as one of the biggest places in the country where sorcery happens. A rather creepy place, and not in a conventional creepy way. What we know of creepy are just what horror movies show us. The African creepy is on another level. We get to meet this exorcist guy. He asks us to buy a sheep to sacrifice and tells us we should bring him the sheep's guts for the exorcism to happen. My father and uncle take care of this. Me, I'm fucking scared. As I stated earlier, I didn't believe in this shit. But at this point, I decided because honestly, the situation called for it. In a freaking spooky village in the middle of Morocco, where we were advised to never eat anything outside, or accept anything from strangers who might try to curse us, where everything looks twisted as fuck. I was losing it, and I couldn't wait to leave this place forever. The following day, we went to the exorcist, bringing him the guts. He puts them in a bowl. He asks that if we're feeling strong enough, we should stay with him, as more people would make it easier to exorcise my aunt. I really wanted to leave, but seeing everyone else staying, I decided to stay as well. My aunt is lying down in front of us, next to the bull. We are sitting down around her holding hands, and the exorcist starts saying stuff I cannot understand. He gets sweaty, starts to talk faster. I see my aunt twitching in pain. The light went out, and I'm pretty sure I peed my pants at this moment. The exorcist screams something. My aunt screams as well. Then complete silence. I think the silence was for about 30 seconds. but it felt like hours. The exorcist's assistant then comes in with a lamp, and we see that both my aunt and the exorcist passed out. The bowl is on the floor and the guts next to it turned black. I have goosebumps just writing that and re-picturing it. The assistant urges us not to touch the guts at any cost. The exorcist wakes up, puts some water on his face, then tells us to follow him to a nearby hill, on top of it, where he asks us to burn the guts right there, as the demon was now possessing the sheep, and we could not get rid of it. Done. When I was 14, my best friend and I at the time got a Ouija table and decided to play with it. We got into a dark room, lit some candles, and started. Another friend of ours knocked on the door as we tried to contact the spirits. We let her in and resumed. This third person kept mocking us as we tried to get the supernatural messages, when all of a sudden, she passed out. We thought she was joking. But then when she opened her eyes, she started to talk with a voice that wasn't hers. It was damn scary, but we still thought she could be playing with us. Then she laughed, horrible laughter, and started to retell stories of things that happened to me that I never had said to anyone. And same for my best friend. Candles started flickering, and the flames went a bit too high for my skeptical being not to shiver. My best friend ran out of my house straight to her neighbor, who was a candombless mother of saint. When the woman came to my place and saw our friend, she gasped and told us to help bring the girl to her place. We did, but not before getting some scratches by not allowing her to get undressed in daylight, calling to some men that were looking at us as we marched toward the Holy Mother's place. Once there, she locked herself with the girl in a room and told us to wait outside. I don't know what happened, but after a couple of hours, our friend came out, very tired, and didn't remember a thing. The Mother of Saint told us not to play with what we cannot control. The high school I went to was a religious private school. Senior year, it was traditional for the entire senior class to go on a religious retreat up to a remote resort in the mountains with a few teachers. The point of the retreat was to grow closer to each other as a class and also find God, experience spirituality. They took away our phones and forbade us from using any form of the internet or communication with the outside world. Then they made us go through a series of soul-bearing exercises and speeches. Pretty cheesy stuff, not that exciting. On the third day of the retreat, however, the entire grade is in the main hall doing an hour of silent prayer, which is pretty much like meditation, but we were supposed to be communicating with God. All of a sudden, there's a huge crash, and everyone looks over to see a girl toppled over onto the floor. As everyone stares, she starts writhing around on the ground and screaming, but not screaming in pain. The voice she was screaming in was a strange, deep voice that didn't sound like her at all. Someone yelled, "She's seizing." I remember this because there was a girl in our class who was known to have epileptic seizures and would do it in assembly pretty frequently, but this wasn't the same girl. At this point, she stood up and started yelling in tongues. Her eyes rolled back into her head. She kept twitching back and forth. She started to run all around the room, yelling in unintelligible gibberish language, and every now and then, she would run at the cross in the middle of the room, and then run back, screaming and crying. At first, I honestly thought it was a dumb high school prank to freak everyone out. But if that was it, she took it way too far. The teachers tried to calm her down, but she just kept screaming in this weird language. She started pulling on her hair, so one of the teachers called an ambulance, but we all knew it would take a while for them to get to this remote retreat. Another teacher tried to take her by the shoulders, and she dug her nails into his arm really hard and just kept screaming. It took several more minutes to calm her down. At this point, the teachers evacuated us from the room. And then she just went quiet. They took the girl away that night, and she never came back to school after the retreat was over. My friend is Mexican, just like me. So our families believe a lot of crazy shit. My friend's mom believed that someone had put a curse on her, seeing as how so many weird and unfortunate things have been happening to her lately, her rapidly decreasing health as well. Back in her village, you'd hire a brujo for this stuff. She searched around and finally found a reputable one. He paid her house a visit, and turns out that she had been cursed, according to him. A jealous ex-lover of her husband had put a curse on her. He even said that she was lucky to still be walking. He then said he was going to perform a ritual that night in order to dispel the evil. But she had to completely relax and close her eyes. He was going to summon a great spirit who was not supposed to be seen by humans. The brujo does his business, while her daughter, my friend, is there for support. The brujo starts chanting, and the room became very loud and heavy, gradually building up. She couldn't see anything because her eyes were closed, but she felt a presence in the room. She then heard growling and howling and all sorts of animalistic noises. The brujo then said he had found a willing wolf spirit to trace and get rid of the curse. My friend told me at that point, she pretty much shit herself, waiting for it to be over. After a few hours, the noises finally stopped, and the room felt light again. The man then said that the spirit had done its job, and that her mom was good to go. The crazy part is, the next day, her mother was healthy as an ox. I was a pharmacy technician at a hospital with a psych ward. We would have to go around with a cart and dispense the patient's medications. And being a small female, a security guard or male nurse would accompany me, just as a precaution. I never had any real issues, other than the occasional death grip onto my arm or manic outburst. But there was one boy who was entirely different. His chart said he was 9. He had pale skin, dark hair, and huge, bright green eyes. He always greeted me in the most polite way, asked how I was doing, and always found something different to compliment me on every time. He was extremely well-spoken and mature for his age, so I began looking forward to seeing him, as normal small talk is definitely cherished in that setting. If he saw me outside of his room in the halls, he made short as a hello, and always called me Miss Jones or ma'am. One day, a couple of our female nurses saw me pause to chat with him in the hallway, and waved me over to ask if I was out of my mind. Apparently, when he was in kindergarten, he grew an intense attachment to his young female teacher. This escalated to the point of him calling her Mom and leaving notes for her about how he wished he were her son. He had a normal home life with 2 parents, and the teacher tried to explain to him that she couldn't be his mom because that would hurt his real mother's feelings, and that she already had that job covered. So, he went home and killed his own mother in her sleep by cutting her throat, so his teacher could be his mother. The female staff had a general rule of not interacting with him excessively. This was to prevent any kind of attachment from forming. My mother told me this story from her time at a neuropsychiatric ward while she was in grade school. She was making her routine room checks and happened upon the most horrific scene I've ever heard of. This was during the night shift, and generally, all the patients' bedroom doors should be closed. My mother turned a corner and noticed an open door. She saw a staff member's legs on the floor, halfway out of the doorway. When she looked into the room, she saw the patient, a woman with a severe postpartum psychiatric disorder, who had just gouged both of her own eyes out with her bare hands. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding her eyes in her hands. The first staff member to witness the scene was now lying face down on the floor. Had a heart attack when he first witnessed the woman while he was making his rounds. My mother screamed for help and frantically tried to perform CPR on the staff member. All the while, the woman just sat there, calmly, holding her own eyes. We had a young lady in our custody with quite a few issues. We'll call her Jane. On Jane's first night at our facility, staff performing a bed check found Jane in a puddle of blood. Turns out, Jane had been slicing the skin around her shin with her fingernails and was pulling her skin up her leg, essentially degloving her calf. Jane also had a ritual she performed every night before bed. While in her room, she would walk to every wall and touch them in a crucifix pattern. After doing this for a few hours, she would sit on her bed and go to sleep. One night, Jane's pace was frantic. Our staff observed the entire interaction. Reported Jane screaming late into the night. When one staff member went to check on her, she reported Jane standing in the doorway, smiling. The staff asked what was wrong, and Jane replied, "What makes you think you are speaking to Jane?" I was working an overnight shift on an Alzheimer's ward at a nursing home. It was about 2:30 a.m., and I was making my rounds, peeking into the rooms to make sure the patients were where they should be. I went into one room. The woman, who was 83 years old, was sitting straight up in her bed, staring at the wall. I slowly walked into the room and calmly asked her if she wanted to lie back down. She turned her head slowly, looked me right in the eye and said, "They're coming for you, dear." Then she started laughing. I'm talking full-on hysterical, insane cackling. I almost pissed myself right there. She finally calmed down, and I got her to lie back down. When she was about to go back to sleep, she looked at me again and said, "I'm going to miss you when they take you," and went right back to sleep. I was terrified the rest of the night. I work in an ER, and due to my country and state's poor mental health system, we see acute psychotic episodes daily. Over time, you become desensitized to it. But there is still one that turns my stomach. A man was found in a burning abandoned building. He wasn't hurt, but he was acting strange, so the paramedics brought him in. He was homeless, had no ID. He didn't even know his own name. He had 0 drugs in his system. Looking into his eyes, you could tell he was not seeing the same thing I was. As I'm trying to get his name or anything out of him, he keeps telling me he was a pilot for the Air Force and flew experimental airplanes because he could withstand the G-force, and his blood was naturally thin. The blood tests that measure this actually were fairly higher than normal, but not elevated to the point that he was on medication for it. So he wasn't making that up. I was at the desk telling a coworker about the stuff this guy was saying when a resident overheard me. He himself was former Air Force as well, and he looked like he had seen a ghost. As soon as I mentioned the name of the base, this doctor freaked out. He said that that city and base has no roads in or out, and a lot of top secret testing goes on down there. He said that you don't know about it unless you've been there. He told me not to talk about it or make a big deal, which gave me an even weirder vibe. My mother was a nurse that specialized in geriatrics, and she worked for several hospice hospitals for many years. She often described situations at her work with several of the patients. She would say that each person tends to have a very similar checklist right before death. And this checklist often ended in a very similar way. They would get caught talking to someone that wasn't there. When asked who they were talking to, they would always describe an individual who was already dead. When asked what they were talking about, they would say that their relative wanted to know if they were ready to move on. A pretty common response would be, "Yes. They said that they would take me tomorrow at 3. It would often happen that they would die at the exact time their relatives quoted. When I first started working in the hospital, I was sitting with a sweet little old woman. I had sat with her talking about her family and such for 6 hours. Toward the end of my shift, around 9 p.m., they decided she didn't need to have a heart monitor, so they transferred her to a different unit. Once we got to the new room, she immediately started acting differently, just generally angry. All of a sudden, she tried to jump out of the bed, so I immediately got up to stop her. She started screaming bloody murder about how her house was on fire and her family was inside, and she needed to get them out. I tried to calm her down, but to no avail. She started yelling at me about how I'm going to rot in the flames of hell because God told her so, and how I was responsible for her family's death. staring deep into my eyes. She told me all about how I will burn in eternal flames, and that I was filled with evil. I thought, okay, at least she isn't worried about her family or trying to get out of the bed. But then she started screaming at the top of her lungs in what I can only describe as Latin, or maybe even gibberish. She then ripped out her dentures and threw them at me, and pulled back all of the skin on her face into this long, stretched out, creepy smile. She then let out a blood-curdling scream, while her eyes rolled back into her head like some sort of possession scene out of a movie. Just as she let up, my relief came into the room. I wished her luck and booked it out of there. The second I got off the unit, I called my mother and cried for about 15 minutes. And sometimes I still think of her stretched out face. It was 2 a.m. and I was bored. So I went out to this park a bit out of town to go biking. It is for the most part surrounded by trees at all ends, with a running and biking track that goes around the park. The park was lined with streetlights though, so you could vaguely see. I'd been going there a few times that week around this time because it unwinded me, and it felt good to be outside. But this time, when I was making my rounds, I could see 4 fucking 6-year-old looking figures come out of the forest. There could have been 4 or 7 of them. I don't remember. But these little things didn't have a parent with them, and all seemingly stayed silhouette. I was biking in their general direction when they started fucking coming toward me. Thankfully, I was around 200 feet away from them, but I could make out them, and the spooky little shits were coming. I don't think I biked faster my entire life. I literally became Lance Armstrong with an extra testicle for a good 3 minutes charging it home. I've never seen a single person all the times I went, but I haven't gone back. Many years ago, when I was a college student, I was studying in the campus library on a chilly winter evening. I decided it was time to pack up and head out. I popped into the men's room first, and there, I found a woman. She had her back to the door, and she was crying. I asked if she was okay, if she needed help. She turned and looked at me as if I was crazy, and then she was gone. She didn't go past me. There were no other exits. No spooky noises. Just there one breath, and gone the next. I hauled ass out of there, and luckily, I didn't piss myself right then and there. This happened on a weekend morning. And note, I only have one child. Early in the morning, I was browsing Reddit when I thought, I'll just go sit outside. So I quietly get out of bed, careful not to wake my sleeping toddler. Nice and peaceful. An hour to myself before the devil spawn wakes up. Now when my son is searching for me, he repeats, "Mommy, where are you?" in this adorable voice that you cannot mistake for anyone else's but his. I'm sitting there, browsing Reddit, when I hear, "Mommy, where are you?" Oh damn, he woke an hour early. Awesome. I go to get up, but then I heard it again. "Mommy, where are you?" I freeze. The voice is coming from our elderly neighbor's fence. "Mommy, where are you?" definitely coming from there.
Mommy, where are you?
In an almost impatient tone. At this point, I think this is like a horror story. Something wants me to go over there and kill me. So, being the smart person I am, I go over there. Just kidding, I run like a bitch inside the house, up the stairs to my sleeping toddler, in the comfort of my own bed. "10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I was in bed petting my very bossy cat, who had pushed my bedroom door open a few minutes prior when I saw my dad. The entry to the kitchen is just that, an entrance, there is no door. I saw him in his oversized black shorts and miscellaneous old t-shirt cross the kitchen entryway. First I thought, why the fuck is he not at work? Then I realized he wasn't wearing his glasses, which led me to think he must be sick. So I get up, despite my dickhead cat's nasty face, and walk into the kitchen to ask him if he's feeling okay. No one was there. No one was home. All the doors were still locked. I wasn't afraid, but turning that corner and expecting to see a person and see nothing but a bright empty room was very creepy. When I was around 11 or so, my siblings and I were all playing hide and seek in my house. Now I know under the bed is the first place you always look, but for whatever reason, I decided to hide under my little sister's bed in her dark room. So I get down on the floor and squeeze under and wait for the seeker to come looking for me. And as I'm laying there, I hear a little girl giggle next to me. I could clearly see I was the only one under the bed, and I was the only one in the room. I shot out from under the bed and told everyone what happened, and that was the end of the game. I was a utility locator. I used to work on a team with my dad. To find a gas service from the gas main to the house, you must connect the equipment at the gas meter. Many older homes have the gas meter in the basement, and sometimes I would be the one that would connect the equipment while my dad found the gas service. On this particular day, we get to a house that had a meter in the basement. I go up, knock on the door, and the homeowner points me in the direction of the stairs to the basement. I go down and I see a gas meter in the corner with 2 walls built around it, making it like a closet with no door. Behind the gas meter is an old crawl space halfway up a cinder block wall. No lights in the crawl space. As I step into the closet area, I hear what I can only describe as a demonic growl come from the crawl space. I step out and call my dad, not wanting to sound spooked. I just say I need a flashlight. He hung up, and I stood outside of the doorway and just reached in to hook up the equipment. My dad comes down the stairs with the flashlight, and as he steps through the door to see if I got in the dark, the same demonic growl comes from the crawl space. He about knocked me over trying to get back, hands me the flashlight, and goes back outside. I just stood there pointing the flashlight into the crawl space with a feeling that something was watching me. He calls, tells me he's done. I grabbed the equipment as quickly as possible and got the fuck out. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a dog or a raccoon or anything I've ever heard before or since. I was watching TV late at night a few years ago, and the TV turned off by itself. Initially, that didn't freak me out, so I turned it back on and continued watching. A few minutes later, I felt really uneasy, and the TV turned off again. I turned it back on once again, but I just had this very distinct feeling something was behind me. When I turned around, along the wall of the hallway leading into the rooms was this big black mass. I'll never forget the distinct feeling I had, like it sucked all the energy out of me. It was honestly the most evil, empty feeling I have ever felt in my entire life. As soon as I looked at it, it darted into the hallway. I turned on every damn light in the house. That was the first and last time I have ever experienced something like that. I don't really believe in ghosts or shadow people, but that event is the one thing from keeping me from being a skeptic. My friend had mentioned that she had one, so I asked her to pull the board out so I could check it out. At first, she said no, but then agreed to do it as long as she didn't have to participate. After she had the board set up, I asked, "Is there anyone in here?" Nothing. So being a dumb teenager, I said, "If anything is in here and not talking, you're a coward." The board was put away after that. Fast forward about a week later, me sleeping on my couch. I wake up on a stereotypical stormy night. Thunder, lightning, wind and rain, the works. I look around to see why I woke up. Couldn't see a thing. So I decide to try and fall back asleep. After laying there for about 30 minutes, I hear from downstairs,
"Get the boy,"
in a very raspy, wispy voice. I open my eyes and listen. Nothing. I start to fall back asleep, and then hear,
"Get the boy."
It was much louder this time. Then, my downstairs door slammed shut. Cut to me, freaked the fuck out. This story was told to me by my cousin, who said that he, his brother, his dad, and his best friend were using a Ouija board in their basement. Prior to starting, they took a large porcelain doll out of the room because it was creepy and placed it in an adjacent room face down on a pile of towels. My cousin took a short bathroom break because the board was just spouting nonsense. His dad, brother, and friend started asking the board questions without him. One of the questions was, "Who is in the other room?" At that point, it just started spouting random numbers. And when my cousin came back into the room, his brother said that it wasn't working and that they were going to put it away. And he showed him the answer to the last question he asked, to which he said, "Dude, that's my social security number." Then they started to talk to whatever started spewing answers out. It told my cousin he would die in the Air Force. At this point, they tell the entity they are communicating with to prove itself. It then spelled out the word doll. They opened the door to check on the porcelain doll they had laid in the other room, and when they opened the door, the doll was standing upright in front of the door, staring right at them. Everyone freaked out. His best friend burned the Ouija board, and my cousin joined the Air Force. When my friends and I played, we all asked it questions that only the person asking would know the answer to. It would answer the questions. We played with this thing forever. We had cold spot experiences. It would place a candle where the cold spot was, and the candle would burn sideways, not straight up and down. One night we all asked it how long we had left to live, and this is where it gets scary. Everybody asked, and they had 50 to 60 years left. When I asked, it said I had 10. So I asked, 10 years? The answer was 10 days. It said I was going to be killed in a car accident by a girl named Emma. We asked it 3 days later, and it said I had 7 days left. I asked it 2 days later, and it said I had 5 days left. At this point, I'm freaking out, carrying a Bible in my pocket, wearing a big cross. I finally tell my dad, and of course he doesn't believe me, so I made one out of paper and used it to show him. He flipped out and told me I didn't have to go to school that day, the day I was supposed to die. I didn't go to school, and thankfully nothing happened. I've used a board with results, and I let something into my home. I've been physically assaulted by this entity. It started out with that feeling like you're being watched, doors closing, footsteps on the hard wood when you're home alone. And it progressed slowly into being kept awake by something shaking the bed or pulling off your covers. Sometimes even whispering my name. The board would disappear for days on end, then show up in places you never would have put it. I became obsessed with it. Then it was a black mass in the corner of the room, or the silhouette of a man watching you from the doorway. After that, it escalated pretty quickly. I had my hair pulled, fingers pricked, scratched, choked, held down in bed while this thing whispered in my ear what could only have been Latin. We had our house blessed, and the bad thing hasn't shown back up. Just normal occurrences now. But I will never again play with one of those boards. I was about 12 or 13, spending the night at a friend's house, goofing around with the Ouija board with him and his sister. We were getting all sorts of gibberish words spelled out, just kind of scaring ourselves, not taking it very seriously, when we got the message, "I can see you through the window." And then the message, "I can see you through his eyes." There was just a small window in the basement room where we were, and just the backyard and woods past the driveway visible through that window. We asked it more questions, and it said, "I'm under the car." So we somehow got up the nerve to go out with a flashlight and peek under the car, where we saw a huge black stray cat, which was hissing. We ran inside, freaking out. And at that exact moment, the power failed and all the lights in the house went out. A few minutes later, the power came back on. We sat up until dawn, scared, and never played with the board again. My wife and I had some unexplained things going on in the house we were renting. So, we got a board so we could try to figure out what we were dealing with. Bad idea. Now the board was just a standard plain board. We used it one night to speak with our hopefully friendly spirit. What we didn't realize is that Ouija boards opened the door for anything to come through and speak. The planchette flew off the board near the end of our session, and we had no real answers to anything. We were speaking with something, but it was very evasive with its answers. Things got worse in the house, and we eventually broke our lease and moved. Radios and TVs going on by themselves, water running. After the board, though, things got much worse. Voices, moving objects, and my wife even says that one night I was possessed. My great aunt was never married, and when I asked why, my dad told me the story. Apparently when she was 16, she had a pretty serious boyfriend. She used a Ouija board and asked if they would get married. The answer was no. She asked if they would break up. The answer was no. She asked if one of them would die. The answer was yes. When she asked which one of them, it said goodbye. A week later, her boyfriend was in a wood chipper accident at the mill where he worked. My friend and I were about 14 or 15. She had a Ouija board that we used quite often. I always thought she was pushing it for the fun factor. I never took it too seriously. One night we started. It was about 9 p.m. We started getting very strange sayings. None of them I can remember. We got a name. And although I have forgotten the name over the years, I do remember it said it was from Malaysia, and that he was here to protect us. The next thing we know, it's 7 a.m. It was as if we blinked and the sun was up. We lost 10 hours of our life. Neither of us remember anything about it. We were sitting there at the table staring at each other like, what the fuck just happened? Too bad we didn't have a third person there to tell us. She would never use it again. I did. But I never had that happen again. At 2 or 3 years old, my cousin was kidnapped. At the time, they lived in a big city outside of the United States. He was on a playground with his brother and babysitter when he was suddenly grabbed and thrown into a van that sped away. Someone from the neighborhood that was already in their car tried to follow them, but the van got away. My aunt and uncle ended up filing a police report and were pretty much told by them not to keep their hopes up. Weirdly, by the end of the evening that same day, my cousin was dropped back off at the playground. When they asked my cousin what happened, apparently all the kidnappers did was drive around the city all day with him, gave him a bunch of candy and toys, and dropped him back off. I hike in a lot of remote areas. I was hiking in Pennsylvania, miles from anything, not even on a trail, just bushwhacking through the woods. When I come up on this guy about 200 feet away sitting on a log, just sitting there in jeans and a hoodie over his head, staring at me. I wave. He doesn't wave back. I start walking over, wave again and yell something like, "Wow, wasn't expecting to see anyone else out here." No response. I was getting a little nervous, but I had already committed to keep approaching. Then I start noticing rock piles and circles and things like scraps of clothing hanging in the trees. I get about 10 feet from him, and this friggin' pheasant takes off, scaring the shit out of me. That's when I notice it's not a man, it's a mannequin, sitting there, dressed up, surrounded by strange rock piles and things hanging in the trees, miles from anything. I hightailed it out of there thinking maybe I had come upon something drug-related. I have no idea. I was looking at apartment buildings, but I saw a basement apartment with a rent that was ridiculously low for the area. There were pictures, the basement was finished, looked professionally decorated, and even had high ceilings. I contacted the person and was at the house checking out the place before the end of the day. It was a husband and wife who had converted their basement for a bit of extra income. They told me the rent was so low because they wanted someone to move in immediately. After the tour, things got odd. After telling the husband I loved the space, he pulled out a lease and started badgering me into signing it right then and there. When I'm reluctant, he started knocking hundreds of dollars off of the rent, to the point that this apartment advertised for around $1,200 a month was now being offered to me at $600 a month. He starts getting more and more frantic and excited, telling me if I don't have any furniture not to worry about it. He and his wife would supply me with everything I would need. All I would have to do was ask, just sign the paper. That's when I noticed that he was actually physically blocking the exit, and that his wife was staring at me like I was a hamburger. I hightailed it out of there. Still feel like I should have alerted the police or something, though I imagine if people started disappearing, it would have been in the news or something. Right? I used to pick up my prescriptions at a late-night pharmacy in a bad part of town, because they always renewed early, and I likes my drugs. One night, a large homeless man asked me for money as I was walking out. I mumbled something about not having cash and continued walking to my car. As I approach my car, I look in the reflection of my driver's side window and see that he's been following me and now is right behind me. He has this hard, angry look on his face, and I'm a little chick. I didn't want him forcing his way in my car, so I grip my keys and turn around to face him. Right as I did, an old hoopty pulls up right beside us, rolls down the back window, and a German shepherd sticks his head out and starts ferociously barking at the man. Creepy bum takes off running. The two men in the front seat of the car wordlessly nod to me and peel out into the night. My dad was a grave digger as a teenager. Usually, they dug a grave in the daytime and were done well before dark. Well, my dad decided to go screw around with some of his friends and told the other guy he'd be back to finish his part. He didn't get back until sundown. So now he was stuck digging alone in the dark with a gas lamp. This was a long-ass time ago. He did have the company of the groundkeeper's little Jack Russell Terrier. So he's almost done working on the last bit by the foot of the grave, when the dog starts making these alternating growls and whines. He was so focused on finishing the grave and trying not to freak himself out that he refused to turn around for a good 10 minutes. When he finally did, there was a massive guy standing at the tombstone just staring down at my dad. He was wet from the waist down, and the bottom of his pants were torn off and covered in mud. My dad said he crawled out of the grave and ran like a bat out of hell. When he got to the road about a mile away, there were police cruisers with their floodlights on, driving slowly and clearly looking for someone. Apparently, the guy had escaped from an asylum in the town over and had waded in a few miles of swamps before walking into the cemetery. When I was 6, my parents' room was right beside me and my sister's room. I was a scaredy cat, always wanted to sleep beside my parents, although the one night that I didn't, something bizarre happened. Before my sister and I had went to sleep, we brushed our teeth, where my sister accidentally spilled water all over her pajamas. She changed into a new set and we shortly went to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m., feeling extremely cold and confused. At the time, we lived in a country where it was hot throughout the year. We didn't have air conditioner at the time, so with limited ventilation, the room was usually extremely hot. Looking around, still feeling confused, I was able to hear my sister's deep breathing on the top of the bunk bed. Her breathing was in rhythm, and I didn't bother to check on her. I remember walking toward the door to move to my parents' room. Right outside our door is where our living room is located. A big gray couch is located in the center of the room, and there was my sister, wearing the wet pajamas, sitting on the floor in front of the couch. Her face was partly covered with her hair. Her hands were on her knees, where she was squatting while staring at me with a smile on her face. I vividly remember staring back at her and wondered, "Who's this girl? Is that my sister?" I was extremely scared and dumbfounded, remembering that my sister was fast asleep in the room. Although hard to deny, she looked exactly like my sister. I remember that she was really pale and had the same haircut as her. After a minute or two of staring, I remember running as quickly as possible to my parents, leaving the mysterious girl outside and a story to tell the next day. About 15 years ago, some Navy buddies and I decided to go ghost hunting. We had heard of this place where some strange shit would happen. It was a park near a beach and railroad tracks in Pensacola, Florida. We went there and found that it was a trail through some woods that would go toward the railroad tracks, then would come back to the main road about a quarter of a mile away. We went in and everything was dark, but not too creepy. About a quarter through the trail, one of my buddies started freaking out about some dude following us. We all looked, but saw nothing. We kept going. That's when he was knocked to the ground. He started struggling to get up. His eyes were bulging and he wasn't breathing. He was struggling and trying to get up but couldn't. He was even reaching for the wooden rails, but still couldn't pull himself up. He even ripped 2 fingernails out of his fingers trying. We tried to help him up but couldn't get him up. This was odd because he was the smallest one of us. It was like he was being held down. His lips were starting to turn blue and he was frantic. Then in the struggle, my other buddy's silver cross fell out of his shirt, and then everything stopped. We hightailed it out of there and never went there again. We actually never went ghost hunting again either. When I was 7, a man tried to get me into his car. I was riding my bike around the neighborhood when this older car passed by, then slowed down and reversed toward me. The man started off by asking me some basic questions. He started asking me if my parents were home. He then opened his door and told me he had a present for me if I got in the car. My mother and grandmother had already given me the whole stranger danger speech and what to do, so I immediately started screaming for help. The man's expression changed instantly into a mask of hate and he sped off as my neighbors started coming outside. A year or so later, a little girl a few blocks down went missing and was never found. Still gives me chills, 37 years later. The night was young, and a girl I had a crush on for the longest time asked if I wanted to see a movie with her. Jumping at the chance, I said yes. To my surprise, when we get there, she takes into no consideration what movie I want to see and asks for 2 tickets to Paranormal Activity. A little bit about myself. I'm a pussy, especially when it comes to scary movies. I couldn't give a fuck what anyone else calls me. I like to sleep at night, and seeing these movies doesn't help. Not wanting to seem like a pussy to the girl I liked, I agreed to see it. Shit my pants, screamed my ass off, yelled more than her. She had to hold me. All in all, it was a good date. Fast forward to when I get home. I'm petrified. I can't go to sleep, so I have the TV on. I have the controller to the TV right next to my face and eventually fall asleep. A couple of hours later, I wake up and it's pitch dark in my room. I freak out and start searching for the TV remote to turn the TV on. I search left and right and all over my bed and I can't find it. Panic strikes me and I make a dash for the lamp next to my bed. I turn it on and look all over for the remote. It's nowhere to be found. That's when I look at the TV, and I shit you not. Standing vertically, I might add, on the top of the TV is my remote, staring at me as if it were asking me to grab me. I dare you. Did I mention it was standing up vertically? I let out a scream. My parents woke up. My brother woke up. The dogs. The whole fucking neighborhood. They rushed into my room, but by the time they got there, the controller was lying flat. All in all, I didn't sleep well for at least a month, and I never spoke to the girl again. We were high schoolers, and it was Black Friday. We drove to a huge mall maybe an hour away. It was about 3 a.m. when we left, and being a bunch of bored kids, we decided to try and take a little detour through the woods. So we duck off the interstate onto a 2-lane highway. No other cars for at least a half an hour at this point. We're driving through the woods, and come over a hill into a valley with a river at the bottom. I guess the dew point must have just reached because immediately after we turn over the hill, fog starts billowing from out of nowhere. I've never seen anything like it. You could see the outlines of the clouds in the darkness, and that was it. By now we were spooked, but still being dumb and bored, we dare a few of us to go running out into the fog. So we pull over, and with the fog lights, there's maybe about 30 feet of visibility. 3 of us get out of the car, walk forward a little, and suddenly it gets cold. A huge blast of wind, and now the fog is so thick, you literally cannot see your hand in front of your face. At this point, we started getting really scared and ran back to the car, except I tripped. That was scary enough, but it gets worse. At this point, all 4 of us are freaking out. We need to get home, or at least get out of the fog. We drive a little and see a sign for Old Mine Road. And the fog looks a little better, so we pull onto it to figure out what's going on. My friend's car has a navigation system, and we were on our phones trying to use Google Map. We're driving along this unpaved road, and the fog gets a little better. We turn a corner, and the headlights lit up what must have been 20 or so deer. But not the deer, just their eyes. I don't know if they were deer since deer's eyes don't normally glow green, but I really need to think that they were deer for my own sake. At this point, we were freaking out. We tried to turn around, except now the fog has gotten even worse. GPS says it's another 5 minutes away to a big highway, so we decided to just keep going, all on edge. We're almost home free when we turn one more corner, and there's just a pile of trash in the middle of the road, as if some hoarder just dumped everything off in the middle of the woods. The driver slows down to get around it, and all of us are just staring at this trash. Something is up with it, we can tell. At this point, I would recommend you look up what is known as the Rake. From northeastern America, specifically the border of Connecticut and New York, where we were. The Rake, to my understanding, is a half-man, half-dog hybrid that roams the woods and hunts packs of deer. And I swear to God, the fucking Rake just erupted from underneath the trash. I took one look at it before promptly pissing my pants. It had a pale, ghastly white face. similar to Voldemort. Hunched back, wispy body hair, fangs, and was extremely skinny. And it had black eyes, completely unnatural. The driver guns it, and all of us are screaming bloody murder as we fly down the road. Have you ever been so afraid that you've had to puke? Because that is primal terror. We pulled over at a gas station near our houses and just lost it. 3 of us pissed ourselves. The Rake is very much real, and it is fucking terrifying. Stay on the highways for your own sake. It was 10:30, and I was laying on the couch, jamming out through my earbuds and playing on my iPad. I closed my eyes while listening to Lithium by Nirvana, when I notice the song just cut out. I open my eyes, and I'm outside, in the cul-de-sac, at the other end of my neighborhood, about a half a mile away, wearing nothing but pajama bottoms in below freezing temperatures, just staring out into a cornfield. I walk back to my house, and when I get to my room, I saw it was 3 a.m. No clue what happened, but I had apparently scribbled in my school notebooks and put out the fireplace during my little nighttime adventure. I had thought it was all a dream until I woke up the next day, and my mom asked about all the grass I had shaken off my pants onto the floor. Me and 3 buddies were hanging out late one night in a car on a dark street. You fill in the blank. I picked this particular street because my grandma lived on it, and I was very familiar with the neighborhood. I knew the families that lived in most of the houses on that block. Elderly people. When we pulled up, I surveyed the houses. Everyone's lights were off. We should have no trouble parking here for as long as we want. I had the driver park in front of my grandma's friend's house on the corner. My grandma's friend, a lot like my grandma, was an old woman who went to bed very early. No family lived with her, no husband. Knew her most of my life. My grandma's friend lived on a medium-sized lot, and her house was on a small hill. Small, but steep, a nightmare to mow. I'm sitting in the back behind the passenger seat. The car is still running at this point. We hadn't been there for more than 2 or 3 minutes. We had just begun our activities when I catch a glimpse of something moving in the passenger side mirror. I look out the window, and what I saw scared the shit out of me then, and still scares me to this day over 10 years later. I saw the silhouette of a person lying on their stomach, doing an army crawl, really fucking fast on the side of the hill, and it was headed right for us. This thing was moving quick, and I'm telling you, I don't know how it's even possible to lie flat on the ground and crawl that fast, let alone on the side of a hill. It wasn't going down the hill. It was moving parallel along the side of it. I screamed for the driver to go. This thing had covered some serious fucking ground in a matter of seconds. It was within 5 or 6 feet of my door, and we squeal-taired the fuck out of there. As we got to the end of the street and turned onto Main Road, the driver and my buddy next to me in the back were yelling, "What the fuck, man? Was it the cops?" I couldn't speak. I was so fucking scared. It had only been 10 or 15 seconds since we bolted down the street, and I just wanted to get as far away from that road as possible. I couldn't process what I had seen. I didn't want to. I looked at my friend in the passenger seat up front, and he had an absolutely terrified look on his face. And I said, "You saw it too, didn't you?" He didn't say anything. He just kept looking in the side mirror and then back to the dashboard. By this time, my 2 other friends were pretty mad, and emotions were starting to escalate. I told them I saw somebody or something crawling toward the car really fast, and I asked my friend to back me up. All he did was nod, and then he asked us to drop him off at home. I wanted him to tell us what he saw, but he refused. All he would say is that he saw something. At that time, that was good enough for me. I was just relieved I wasn't the only one that saw it. I don't know who or what it was, and I hated going to my grandma's house after that. Didn't really want to be around her friend after that either. The thought of a 60-year-old woman army crawling that fast at 1 a.m. still scares the hell out of me. I was watching The Exorcist when I was 16, and my grandmother came home and told me to turn it off, because that was the last movie my grandfather watched the night he died. About 20 minutes later, I saw him rocking in the chair next to my couch, and no matter how many goddamn times I pulled the blanket over my head, he stayed there until he looked at me, smiled, and vanished. I still can't watch that movie to this day, and that was 18 years ago. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and the house I rented last year was built in the mid-1800s. Things would often fall off the counters. We would hear crashing noises all the time, and when we went to go investigate, stuff would be lying broken on the floor, even though no one else was home. The weirdest occurrence of this happened when my roommate and I heard a noise from the kitchen, and when we walked in there, a painting was in the middle of the floor, 7 feet away from where it was hanging, and the water was running. One night I was laying in bed about to fall asleep, and I got the sense that someone else was in my room. My stomach dropped, and my hair stood on end. I got extremely anxious, and suddenly my body felt like there was an electric current going through it. I heard a distinctly human voice right next to my ear. A man's voice, speaking complete gibberish. I was paralyzed with fear, and ended up sleeping on the couch that night. Unfortunately, this started happening more often, about once a month, right as I was falling asleep. I would get a sense that something wasn't right, and I would hear voices. One time, I heard a woman laughing. Another, I heard someone say, "My name is Evan." Sometimes it was just gibberish. On 2 occasions, I felt like my body was moving when it actually wasn't. One time, my body felt like it was levitating, and another, like it was being dragged across the floor. But at the same time, I could feel that my body was laying in bed. It was very odd. I stopped telling people after the first time, because I thought they would think I was crazy. I honestly thought I was either schizophrenic or possessed. I was so fucking scared to even go to bed. This is when I found out what sleep paralysis was. All the symptoms fit. The electric current feeling running through my body, the hallucination, and the temporary paralysis. I was so relieved to have a medical explanation. However, I had never experienced it before moving into that house, and I have since moved out, and have not experienced it again. I'm a very logical person, and I'm happy to accept sleep paralysis as the answer. But part of me feels like it was something more. My father's old house was huge. 5 bedrooms, and on quite a lot of land. Very secluded. It couldn't be seen from the road or nearby park, and was surrounded by bushland. it was winter, so there were no windows open and we didn't have heaters in the house. It was probably around 10 p.m. at night. I was the last one awake, and I decided I wanted to call it a day. I did my usual routine before bed and lay down to go to sleep. I was lying there for probably 10 minutes when I could feel some kind of pressure on the bottom of my bed. I thought that maybe I was entering the sleep stage, so thought nothing of it. Then the pressure started going around my legs, not on them, but all around them and between my legs. I freaked out and did what any normal person does. I froze and hoped it would go away. After 5 more minutes of just pressure on my legs, it lifted. I remember my heart beating so fast. I sat up in bed and tried to shake off the adrenaline when I felt a hand press against my face and a massive gust of air blow my hair back. I freaked the fuck out and slept on my dad's floor that night. We moved soon after because my stepmother started to have weird experiences too. I'm not saying it was paranormal. It was just something that I could not and still cannot understand or explain. Outside of Huntsville, Texas, there's a road they call Demon Road. It runs parallel to another road. In between is an old cemetery and a dirt road connecting the two roads. Rumor has it that on Demon Road there was a car accident and a police shootout that left 2 people dead. The car was never taken from the spot it crashed in, and the angry spirits never left. About 4 years ago, I went down there with some friends to investigate. We parked on the dirt road and a truck pulled in from the other side. KC daylighters on, blinding me. A woman got out, and I thought I was going to die. Technically, we were trespassing. She walked up to my window and said, "You be careful." She got back in her truck and drove off. I got out and headed down Demon Road. About a quarter mile down the road, I felt a cold punch on my chest and froze in my tracks. I tried to walk forward, and again, felt a press on my chest. I decided something was telling me it was a bad idea to continue. About 30 minutes later, the group came back and we started comparing pictures, audio, and EMF readings. We caught some quality pictures and EMF readings, but no audio. That's when one of the girls asked the guy next to her, "Why did you pull my hair?" He said he didn't, and about 10 seconds later she screamed, "Something jerked my ponytail." We scrambled back to our cars and sped back to the city. When we got back to civilization, I got out and saw handprints and finger drawings all over my car. The most compelling were the 2 smeared handprints on the trunk, like someone was hanging on, lost grip, and slid down the trunk. The Roman numeral 12 was also fingered into the dust. I don't try to make sense of what happened that night, but that will always be burned into my mind as the absolute scariest encounter of my life. What about you? Have you experienced something that you cannot explain? Has something left you questioning everything you thought was possible? Perhaps you yourself will experience something you might find you cannot explain. If you have a story you would like to see featured here, please contact me through any of my social media links or email me at duchessdark676@gmail.com. See you next time.